Erica, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Happy to be here.
Sometimes, and people that have listened to multiple episodes, don't really hear me introduce or let people introduce themselves. I just jump into it. So I don't know, maybe to change it up, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Erica. I've lived in Utah for 12 years.
It's a long time.
I live in Midvale, very interesting city. And I work for Catholic Community Services with refugee foster care. I like to hike. Yeah.
There we go. Me and Erica crossed paths when she came to work at Asian Association at Sunnyvale Neighborhood Center. How many years ago was that? I was thinking about that.
I think almost 7.
Wow.
I know. And
That's
you're
crazy.
the first person to take a chance on me. I'm very grateful.
Looking back, it doesn't feel like a chance at all. It feels like one of the better decisions I've made about hiring. So you mentioned 12 years in Utah, and I know a little bit about you coming from Southern California. You moved directly from Southern California to Utah.
Yeah.
I think that always begs the question of why leave sunny Southern California,
Yes.
the beaches, all that, to come to Utah?
I know. And I was very stubborn because I grew up Mormon family in Southern California, and I thought, I'm not going to be one of those kids who just goes to BYU and goes to Utah. And I was really adamant about going to Brown or Oxford specifically.
Oh, okay.
Those were my dreams. And then I looked at the tuition there, and I was like, dang it, I'm going to go to BYU. I'm going to go to Utah. So that's why I came, was cheap tuition.
I mean, fair enough. Let's be honest. For the quality of schooling you get at BYU and the tuition costs, it really is quite the deal
hard to beat.
if you take away all the other factors. But I would have loved for you to go to Oxford, because I don't know if you knew this about me. Part of my LDS Mormon mission, I lived in Oxford.
No.
Yeah.
I've considered maybe I still want to go, but then I think maybe it'll be enough if I pull a Great Gatsby and just technically go there, visit there, and then say I went to Oxford.
So cool. A fun fact about Oxford is that they have an incredible library. And if I can't remember, you'd have to look up the justification, but if you present some justification of why you need to go sit in their library and read, because they have just tons of articles and books and whatever from all their different little universities there, they'll let you do that. So you could go sit in a reading room.
I studied at
Yeah, you
Oxford.
studied at Oxford. You sat there. I tried to do that last time I went, but I was more or less just passing through for a day to just kind of reminisce for a minute.
Yeah. They have a master's in refugee studies.
Yeah, I did see that
And
as well.
I've watched that video a lot of times, but I haven't been able to reconcile. I thought, I'll do my undergrad at BYU, and then I'll go to grad school there. And then I thought, why did I think I would have money after my undergrad? So to be continued someday, maybe.
Yeah, I would love it if you were able to do that, because I just love the city, and the vibe in Oxford is really cool. And you have the whole university, but then you have the individual colleges, and it's kind of a different setup compared to the United States, but it's super fun and interesting. So, but you didn't go to Oxford. You went to that school called BYU.
Yeah.
What was that transition like to go from what I perceive, and maybe you can fix my perceptions of laid back California to now you're living BYU, Provo?
Yeah, I would say that perception is pretty valid about growing up in Orange County. One thing that was kind of shocking to me is I think I had pretty strong confidence in growing up, and I thought I'm smart and that there's something different, I'm different than a lot of the other teenage girls because I am religious or whatever. And then I went to BYU and I thought, everyone is smart and everyone is religious. So what makes me special, I guess? So that was, at first, that was kind of surprising to me that it threw me for a loop, but then I kind of figured out, reformed my identity, broadened that, luckily.
Yeah.
There's more to me than just those things. And I also felt like there was definitely a lot of the stereotypes that I thought about what it would be like to be at BYU, but wherever you go, you can find people like you and find people you connect with, people who aren't like you that you connect with. And so found my people, still best friends with them now, really grateful. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. I did notice, so I went to BYU as well, and I did notice that it was very much like that. Like everybody was very bright and like on top of their lives, almost to a point of like being super annoyed by it.
Yeah.
I don't know if you got annoyed by it as well.
No, for sure.
Because it became, for me, like I noticed a lot in like the classes that I would attend, that it was always like almost everybody was like the teacher pet, like raising their hand, trying to answer the questions, trying to get the best score on the ruin the curve for everybody sort of thing. And I was like, oh my gosh, when is this going to stop?
Yeah, I was used to being the only person participating in seminary, and then you just go to BYU and I don't have anything to say, I guess.
Everybody has presumably much more insight into the Bible and Book of Mormon or whatever it is. Yeah. Interesting. What did you study at BYU?
Same as you.
Psychology?
No, I thought you studied anthropology.
No, I did psychology.
What?
I did a bachelor's in psychology.
Did you study anthropology elsewhere? Did I make that up?
I think you made it up.
I literally thought this whole time that you studied anthropology at BYU. Man, must have been someone else.
I think it's just my life study anthropology to like be interested in human beings. But yeah, I did undergrad in psychology, and then I did my master's in social work.
Okay.
Yeah. That's right. I do remember now that when we were talking about your quote-unquote qualifications, your anthropology degree, I was like, that will be useful. Yeah, to be curious about why people are in the way that they are.
Totally. I think it has. I still think about that. I still think about what I learned. And I think curiosity, the word used, is the right word, of just shifting your brain to be curious. And I feel like I still apply some of the things I learned. Yeah. Was
the goal to be an anthropologist, or?
The goal is to work with refugees.
Okay. And here you are.
Here I am. Dreams come true.
Okay. And you didn't know at what level or how you wanted to do it? It was just kind of like an anthropology degree would be a good lead up.
Yeah, I think definitely things narrowed down throughout my life and kind of brought me to that single point. And I was one of those weird kids in high school. We had to take a career education and computer application class, which was a joke to most people, and they were smoking weed, and I was like, this is awesome. You're taking personality quizzes about what jobs would be best for you, and sociology and anthropology came up for me, and I was in 9th grade, and I thought, oh, what are those? And I researched them. I thought, this is perfect. And so I felt like I knew I wanted to learn about people and do something meaningful, but I didn't know what I was good at. I thought, I can't be a nurse. I'm bad at science. I don't think I would be very good at politics. And so I tried to figure out what could I be good at. And anthropology is basically people watching. I thought, I think I'm pretty good at that. So that's kind of what led me there, I guess. And I thought, well, maybe if I learned about the way they view the world, I could be helpful working with refugees. So.
And who doesn't love people watching? Let's be honest, we all love it a lot. Yeah.
But are you good? Do you have a certificate? Do you have a degree in it?
I do not, no. And yeah, you do. So I'll have to default my judgment to you. So you mentioned refugees and that focus. Did that happen before you went to BYU? That you're like, that was on your radar? Because I'll admit, like, refugees were not on my radar until grad school. Yeah,
most people, I think, even when I would say wanted to work with refugees, they'd take them a moment and they'd think, what is that again? I think it was kind of this. Honestly, I think I was pretty impacted by movies. So watching Hotel Rwanda in middle school kind of blew my mind. That scene where they're like, now that you have footage of this, they're going to come and help. And they're like, no, they'll eat their dinner and say, oh my gosh, that's so sad, and keep eating their dinner. And that just kind of haunted me about that happened around the time I was born, and I didn't know about it. And there are things going on right now that I don't know about and I don't do anything about. And so that kind of, I was probably in 7th grade when I started kind of thinking about that and feeling shame about that and trying to understand what to do about that. And then I saw Blood Diamond.
Okay.
And there's scenes just in passing about kind of child soldiers and rehab centers. So just these things that I was exposed to, and I started thinking about, oh, that's a really interesting piece of the puzzle, is the aftermath and the impact of war that has on children and families and people. So it kind of, I wanted to be there where it was happening, but I also thought, I'm just this white girl, like, what am I going to do there? And so then I started thinking about, well, what about when they come here and what that's like? And so that's kind of what led me there. And then, so that I had that intention going into undergrad, and then I took a class and we talked about place and how much we are formed by the place that we're in. And I started really thinking about, so if place has such an impact on our identity, what about displacement? And so that really kind of solidified that on a kind of theoretical level, I guess. And then that was my intention, I guess, throughout. And when I had to choose an ethnographic research project, that's something that I wanted to focus on, was refugees and stuff like that.
That's awesome. I think my thought process was somewhat similar in like thinking about really liking the idea of working internationally, doing refugee work, but then like thinking practically about it and being like, okay, at some level, yeah, like I'm just a white guy. Like what would it mean for me to fly over to Africa or to go to Burma to try to help that situation? Could I have a similar impact by working locally and maybe still, if the chance comes, do some international work? And I think I'm happy with that decision. You know, there's the attractiveness of living internationally, but I think that's just like the novelty in my mind. I don't know that it's obviously really difficult work wherever you go, but yeah,
that's true.
So you thought about it. You went through all your coursework, and then you came to a point where you started having to apply for jobs. What was your first job outside of finishing your anthropology degree?
Well, it was with you. I started about the same time working at Sunnyvale Neighborhood Center with Asian Association of Utah. Peter, you were my boss. And then I worked with Promise South Salt Lake as a family outreach liaison. And I was actually talking to my sister about this the other day. I didn't think about the fact that I didn't have any experience. And so it was really surprising to me when I graduated and I was applying for jobs, and full-time jobs that required a bachelor's level degree, but also experience. And I wasn't getting them. And so then I realized, dang it, I read books, but what do I have to offer these people? How do I prove to them that I think I could do this? So I worked 2 part-time jobs that required a high school diploma. And that's another reason, I guess, why I stayed in Utah. I didn't really expect to stay in Utah post-graduation, but it's really unique that I was able to survive just working 2 part-time jobs, making like, Promise I was making $11 an hour and no benefits, and I could do it. And I'm so grateful that I was forced to start there. Kind of seemed like at the bottom and kind of work my way, learn along the way. So that's where I started. Now that this is all coming back to me, I don't remember all these details, but now that you're saying them, I do remember some of this, and thinking back, and now if it's appropriate, I express that appreciation for you willing to like do those types of jobs, even though you had a bachelor's degree, and maybe you could try, like you said, you're having trouble to find something, but maybe you could try to find something, but then you took a step back and took a chance. And I don't know, if you fast forward real quick to right now, do you feel like that was a good choice for you to do that? Absolutely. And it's amazing too. Like I didn't expect for things to kind of escalate so quickly and get to where I am now. Like, I think I'm proud of the work that I've done, but I also am glad that I didn't start where I am now, and there's so many important things I learned. And I think too, it's funny, looking back, I think my dream job specifically, working with refugees, I wanted to be a cultural orientation person. I wanted to do cultural orientation. That was my dream job. And I've done it in different jobs, informally, but still haven't had that job specifically. So kind of funny. There we go. Maybe, CCS, IRC, I don't know. Maybe there's something in the future there for you. Maybe. Yeah. Similar situation. So I graduated with my master's degree in social work, and I was like, I need a
a master's level job sort of thing. And I went out there and looked and was hoping to find something working with refugees or something in a similar field. And there wasn't a lot available at the moment besides like a quote-unquote entry-level position. So I started at Catholic Community Services making $14 an hour as an employment specialist with a master's degree, and now fresh student loans to start to pay sort of thing. And I just like, I got to get my foot in the door. I got to start somewhere. And really, looking back, it was a perfect start because I was very much involved on the very ground level of a refugee or refugee family coming and having to go through the whole resettlement process. Like the employment piece was such a big piece that, you know, there was obviously some pressure around it, but it's like, Peter, like these guys, they need a job as soon as possible because they're soon going to have to provide for themselves. And so it really helped me to put perspective on the whole refugee process. And from that perspective, you know, I hope that I've been able to keep that with all these other jobs that I've had helping refugees, is to kind of like remember like how difficult and challenging it is for them. So I don't know if you experienced a similar thing where you were able to get a better glimpse of, you know, how things are on the ground. So now that you're kind of managing and overseeing programs, it gives you a bit more perspective.
For sure. And I had that same thought too. I just hope that it's still fresh. And I think we've probably both worked with people who have been in managing positions for so long that it seems like maybe they don't remember what that's like. And so I really do try to think about that often and be intentional about what does my direct service look like now, and how do I stay connected and make sure I'm not just set in one way, I guess, and learning.
Yeah. From your experience as a family liaison and working at Sunnyvale Neighborhood Center, what was maybe some of the eye-opening things about like Salt Lake as a community and how we were working with refugees as a community? Like, what was it like? Wow, I didn't realize that this was going to be that way, or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, so many things every day. I think Utah is a unique place because there's a lot of nonprofits, almost too many hands in the pot, and that was something I learned, and I look back on and I think I played into probably that I was duplicating services or stepping on toes. It's an interesting position to be in. But I can remember visiting families, and I didn't ask them, but they're just saying, you know, we've been waiting, and our kids haven't been in school and we need help registering for school. I'm like, I can help you. And I didn't really understand the big picture that they had case managers and they had to do immunizations first before you can register for schools. And I probably got in the way more than being helpful. But on the other hand, I also felt like because it was a unique situation doing both, because both jobs had me concentrated in kind of 4 apartment complexes. And so those families, I was working with the youth at the after school program, and then I was getting referrals from Promise for those same kind of families, and I felt really connected to them, and I was able to get to know them and build trust in maybe a different way. And so then I think towards the end, I kind of was learning how to be more partner-oriented and helpful, hopefully. But that was something that I didn't really realize, is there's a lot of people helping. And that's usually what I say too. You know, I meet people and they say, oh, you work in a nonprofit. That's so cool. I want to start my own nonprofit. I say, that's great, but you should really make sure that there's not already the one that you want to start, and you could support them in different ways. So I think that was really interesting. And then I just think, the strength and the resiliency of the families and the youth. And I think about, it's really hard to be the messenger sometimes. I remember this family that and they were really having a hard time. The mom had back issues, and she was in so much pain she couldn't work, but their benefits were kind of getting tired of that. She didn't actually qualify for SSI. So it got to the point where she was so confused because she's saying, look, my doctor said I have all these back issues. And I said, I know, but you're losing your benefits and you're going to be homeless if you don't work. And it was so hard. She kept saying the same thing over and over. I said, I know, I believe you. I'm just explaining this is how it works. And then a couple days later, they walked into Sunnyvale and we're in the middle of doing stuff with the kids. And the parents were like, we got this in the mail and it says we won $500,000. And I just felt so horrible because they were so happy.
Right.
And I just had to say, this isn't real. Did you already give them your information? Look, if you Google, there are all these scams, and I know this would be so happy and it would solve all your problems, but it's not real.
Yeah.
And so those kind of things where it's just, I don't know. Yeah, I learned a lot along the way, and I think I still love those families and grateful for everything they taught me.
I think about these sort of situations quite a bit because like the systems of how things work is just very interesting in itself. And like you said, there are so many hands in the pot, so to speak, like in Utah, with so many people willing to help, which is great. Like I think it really pays tribute to what type of people are in our community. They're really wanting to help. But then I think about like, well, how is this all coming together? Is this sort of like a little bit of capitalism and nonprofit where we're all still trying to get our hands in the pot, and are we partly doing it for the feel-good factor or just getting paid factor? Like why is it that so many people want to get involved? I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about that sort of stuff?
I don't know. I think that's something I think about a lot is doing good makes you feel good. So is it selfish, and all those kinds of different kind of deeper questions, I guess. And I think I've seen that a lot with the way people approach the kind of work they want to do versus what's actually helpful. So I think, I think that's all part of it. I think capitalism's part of it. I think making money is kind of funny to me because you don't make very much money. Yeah. So being in it for the money is pretty bizarre to me, but maybe there are people who are doing it for that. But I think the attention, that's something I've kind of struggled with socially, is sometimes I kind of cringe when you're in a social situation and they ask what you do. And I love what I do and I love talking about it and I'm really proud of the work that I do. But I know that, oh my gosh, you are so amazing. It's really uncomfortable. And I still am trying to figure out how to do that and how to navigate this situation. So I think there's a lot of reward for doing this kind of work and a lot of attention and social reward and kind of being put on a pedestal of goodness. And I'm still trying to figure out how to navigate that all.
I'm with you. I don't know after all these years if I've quite figured it out too. You know, I've gone from responses like, well, you know, we all have our different sort of place in the community and we all need to work together. So thank you for saying thank you, but thank you.
Yeah.
You know, like trying to like turn it around. But it is kind of like an awkward thing because there are so many people that are being like, no, your job really makes a difference. Like you're really doing good work. And me, like I just work in a bank or whatever. Like you really are making a difference. And part of me is like, well, you know, if you feel like these other jobs are going to make a bigger difference, why don't you come and help us out, sort of thing. But the other part of me is like, well, we need people to work in the bank too. Yes. So, you know, if you don't have the personality or drive to come and work with kids that are challenging, then stay at the bank, you know?
Yeah, that's so true.
And maybe send some of your money from the bank over to us so we can provide better services. I don't know.
Yeah.
I've been better at like being a little bit more direct about asking that sort of stuff because I think like, why not? If I ask it from a good place, then I think people will respond well. So
that's smart. I'll try that. And I think what you said is true. I read a book about a year ago that I really liked called Think Like a Monk by Jay Shetty. And there's a part in it about how some people choose a job based off of what will do the most good, which is good, but they're not good at it. And so it's not that good, and it won't actually lead to long-term fulfillment. And then some people find something that they're really good at, but it doesn't do any good. And that also is maybe not going to lead to long-term fulfillment, but trying to find something that you're good at and that does good. And banking is good. Well, I watched The Big Short, and I was like, I'm out. Yeah. And then like, dang it, I did it. I have a mortgage, even though I said I wouldn't, and I have a bank account. But yeah, I think I've been trying. That's been one of my strategies for deflecting, is I just talk about that book and encourage them to find something that's both, because yeah, I'm not good at working in the tech industry. I wouldn't be good at that. But I also think a lot of people with good intentions want to get involved in nonprofit, but like you said, maybe they're not cut out to work with teenagers. So you have to be kind of realistic about what are your strengths, what are you passionate about, and how can you combine those things. And I feel lucky. I feel like I found something that has those.
And going back to like the start of our conversation of like how we both were coming to our decisions on wanting to work with refugees, part of that for me probably was this idea of like, I'm Mormon. This is part of my responsibility. I need to do this.
Yeah.
And luckily, I think for me, it is kind of where my general passion is and what I'm good at as well. So it's kind of worked out that maybe some of my ideas of religion and Mormonism have shifted, and so now I'm not like as Mormon heaven motivated, but just like I want to help people out motivated.
Yeah.
Does that happen for you at all? Like, was part of that, would you connect that all to your belief, like
Maybe.
this desire to want to help?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely part of my childhood was service. My mom's special ed teacher, and so I think that was always just maybe part of the narrative. And to me, I guess something that I think is kind of comical with Christianity, conservatism, if that's the right word, is to me, it just seems really obvious that if we're all brothers and sisters, borders and different things like that, I'm really confused by how people make those connections with their own religious values. So to me, it was like the opposite. And I think growing up in Southern California, I realized, what if I had been born 2 hours south? My life would be completely different. And recognizing that I work hard, etc., all that narrative, but my life would have been totally different, and I didn't do anything to deserve that or earn that, and I'm not better than anyone else. So I think those kinds of beliefs about just if we're all connected and we're all just human beings and we're all brothers and sisters, then I really care about my brothers, at what they're going through over there, even though I don't have to see it every day. So I think those kinds of values have probably enmeshed with my religious upbringing did bring me to where I am now, and do still kind of ring true, where I'm like, that's my brother. And yeah.
Those are really good points, and I've thought about that same sort of thing when, you get into the politics or the religion of things, where you kind of spot these hypocrisies a little bit, and you're like, well, what about this? Like, this doesn't really make sense. And I honestly haven't heard a great explanation for that either. So I would love, maybe I could find somebody that can bring other perspective into this about, this Christian, Republican, conservative viewpoint of our country and how we spend our money and how we support other people and immigration, all these sort of things, like how do we bring together this idea of Christianity, that we are all brothers and sisters, we're supposed to love each other, we're supposed to serve each other, with this idea of like, if you come from another country, we're going to treat you differently, and all this sort of thing. And obviously we could go down a very big rabbit hole talking about that and wondering about that. And there's plenty of questions to ask, but I think it's valid questions. And part of the reason why I wanted to have these conversations with people is to bring out these kind of perspectives and questions. And if anything, they can just be rhetorical questions for people to think about and be like, okay, yeah, I've never challenge myself that way, sort of thing.
Hopefully.
I hope so too. You eventually started working for Catholic Community Services in refugee foster care. Foster care is obviously, I don't think I have to tell anybody, a challenging thing. I think you started as a case manager, correct? What was your experience as a case manager?
Oh, I was doing case management at AAU, youth case management, when I left, but kind of part-time, and working with youth with families, and working with the families and working on goals and following up on those goals. And I loved it. But the case management with refugee foster care is really intense because we're completely responsible for them. Legally, the liability, all that kind of thing. They're in the custody of CCS, and so as a case manager, you're acting as a legal guardian, which was pretty comical to me. I was like 25, and I'm like, I have 15 children, teenagers that I'm responsible for, and I think I didn't do a great job, honestly, as a case manager, really partnering with the foster families. I was really focused on the youth and their needs. But now I can see how that's obviously the key, yes, they're not here with their own family, but that family unit that teenagers and youth and that development phase they still need, and that's the key to success, not a really great case manager. But that was really overwhelming. I think you've probably experienced this, where there are times in social work that just you're so stressed and you're so emotionally drained, and I always tell this story to new case managers now to be like, it's okay. I was really overwhelmed, and there was also a lot of political stuff about Muslim bans and stuff, and I was so just upset and really overwhelmed with my caseload. And I was at a party, but I just started crying because I was physically at the party, but I was not at the party. And I was thinking about work, and I was thinking about these kids and things that were going on with them, and it wasn't working, and I started crying. And my husband, Dylan, hugs me and just said, "You could just work at the gym." And I just started laughing but crying louder, and just thought, oh my gosh, and kind of what we're saying about, finding a job that has meaning you're good at. But I was like, I could just say, welcome to the gym, thank you for coming. And there's been so many times still where I think I'm just gonna run away. Like, I'm just gonna run away. It's so hard. So yeah, as a case manager, but also you learn along the way of working smarter and knowing when you've given it everything, and letting go of the outcome, that you're not in control of that. So I think I learned the hard way a lot of times with that, where it really consumes me. But I think I've kind of, it still consumes me sometimes, but I've learned better strategies, I guess, for managing all of that. But yeah, being case manager was wild.
Yeah, and I would, to add to like these better strategies or frames of thinking, I have been there, like trying to maybe overdo what I'm able to give or do for a family, or like really trying to like do a lot of work for them. I step back and I remind myself that before this family ever came in contact with me, they went through so much more than they're probably going through now. Not that what they're going through now is not insignificant, and it's very challenging, obviously, and they do need support, but they've been through a lot. They've made it. They're very resilient. I probably need to take a couple steps back and try to have that balance. Like you said, maybe it's more of a balance that I'm working with this other family that's working with them, or the foster family, or these other systems, and trying to be a little bit more of a facilitator or an orchestra director rather than the person that does it all for them.
Exactly. And I think too, just realizing that sometimes you're trying to put so many supports and services in, and they're not working, but it just needs time, and they need to figure it out. And so that's always comical to me when we kind of just back off and then things get better. Yeah. And I think, okay, yeah, we think that we're, but exactly what you said of just, they can figure it out. They'll figure it out. They figured it out before. It's their life. And I think learning that and reminding myself of that helps.
Yeah, for sure. Just maybe to rewind a little bit, probably a lot of people don't know about unaccompanied minors and a foster care program coming together. So can you explain a little bit about that background, what it is?
Yes, I usually explain what it's not first. So most people are familiar with what state foster care is, and they think, oh, refugee foster care, that must mean that they came as refugees with their families, experienced abuse and neglect, and ended up in foster care, which does happen, unfortunately, but that's not what we do. Like you said, we're working with unaccompanied refugees, and so that means they're coming here without their families. So the separation didn't happen here because of abuse or neglect. The separation happened often during the chaos of war, maybe because of death of parents, or maybe just because of physical separation. Some of our youth are still in contact with their parents. Some of them don't know where they are. Some of them know that their parents are deceased. But for one reason or another, all reasons extremely traumatic, they're coming here without their primary caregivers, without their parents. And then what we do is kind of a bridge between child welfare and refugee resettlement, where we're resettling refugees, but we're also training and licensing foster parents to care for the refugees. And we work mostly with ages 17 to 21. People, just like with state foster care, people want to foster young children, but logistically, a young child wouldn't really survive unaccompanied. And also culturally, if you have enough money to get one of your children out, you're going to send your oldest son out. And then logistically, if you have this insane wait list of refugees that want to be resettled, you're going to prioritize the ones that are about to age out first because it's their last shot. So that's usually why we work with mostly exclusively teenagers. And then they live with foster families while they adjust and adapt to life here. And different than if they were to arrive when they're 18 and you as a job developer, you're so focused on getting them on their feet and being able to pay their own bills so quickly, they often don't have the opportunity to really focus on English or education or just being a kid. So that's really hard to see the difference between a 17-year-old and an 18-year-old, because we know there's not that big of a difference as far as where they're at cognitively, but the reality is so different and the pressure is so different. And so for a 17-year-old, we say, your meals are, you have this family who will feed you your meals, and we just need you to go to school and we'll help you get a job. They still feel the same pressure from their families and home country to send money. So that's really hard to balance and say, but you're just a kid. You can't provide for your entire family right now. You don't have a job. These things. They still feel that pressure, and they work really hard to do that pretty quickly. But that's kind of the experience, and our goal is by the time they turn 21 and age out of our program, just like youth in state foster care age out at 21, for them to be self-sufficient and have healthy relationships. Because we realized at first we were focused so much on the hard skills of English and saving money, and those are all so important, but then what about the relationship skills and how to trust people and attachment and forgiveness and asking for help and all those really hard things to learn, especially if you've experienced a lot of loss. So that's really, we're trying to make sure that we're looking at both and preparing them for both.
I really like that, and I think as a general community, state, society, we could all do a little bit better of like focusing on some of those soft, quote unquote, soft skills compared to the hard skills. Mm-hmm. We're all overly focused on people learning math, people learning the English language, whatever it might be, and not as focused on like, okay, let's check in with you socially, emotionally, and see where you're at. I think it can seem obvious, but it's not obvious that if people feel a little bit more grounded, stable, comfortable in the situation they're in, emotionally, socially, all those other things are going to come so much easier.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah. To kind of go back and also give a plug about this whole unaccompanied minor refugee program, just for people that might not know much about it or want to know much more about it, like obviously go do that research, but these things are politicized, so like they become a part of somebody's political agenda, but really they all started at a very bipartisan humanitarian level. Like there's people around the world that their parents are killed, kids that their parents are killed, and they need to get out of the country because their country's not going to help them. Can they come to the United States and get help? And we said, yeah, let's do that. You know, this seems like a good idea.
Yeah.
Kids need help. We can help them out. We've got these systems in place. Let's do it. So that's what's been happening. So when we think about like, oh, we got to end refugee resettlement, or we got to end all these immigration laws, I think it takes us all to take a step back and say, like, we're doing this from a very humanitarian perspective. Don't try to put your politics on it.
Yeah.
I had to get my soapbox a little bit because I'm really tired of like whoever it is running for president or governor or whatever. They're using these sort of things as a political platform and agenda, and really I think people just need to take a step back, and they really need to check in with their conservative Christian whatever beliefs or their liberal progressive beliefs and say like, yeah, we all agree that helping kids is a good idea, no matter where they come from.
Yeah, one of our foster parents, we've used this quote before because she said it in just a home study we do routinely, and we all kind of stopped and thought, oh my gosh, that's it. It's so obvious once you say it out loud. But she just said, if war broke out here in Bluffdale, Utah, and I was killed, I would hope there would be another mom who would mother my children. And exactly like you said, if we just take a step back and get back to the core of our humanity, it's so obvious. Of course, that's what we'd want and we'd expect from the human race. But it becomes a debate, which is just so crazy. And obviously, you and I both, it's hard for me too, because I think we all have, conservative relatives or whatever who say, you can't let the men come here. But the children are like, okay, whatever. I mean, obviously, I'm glad the children can come, that most people can agree on unaccompanied minors, that's a good thing, but it's also kind of comical and sad because it would be so much better if their families could have come too. So.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's a good reminder. I think I just kind of focused on the kid part of it because it's a little bit more relatable, but then you kind of like find these weird ways to rationalize or justify in your mind why dad shouldn't be able to come or why the family shouldn't be able to come, and it gets really weird. And we should just allow families that are in need, that their countries are not in a good place. Let's allow them to come. We got plenty of space and plenty of jobs. Like the things that politicians say otherwise are mostly just rhetoric.
Yes, and I guess I don't want to get too down this hole, but I think too one of the most heartbreaking parts of my job has been when youth were separated from family because of war, didn't know what happened to them, are resettled here after they've been disconnected for more than 7 years, and then they find them through social media or whatever, and they say, my mom's alive and she's in a refugee camp in Uganda. And your heart is just ripped open because you think, okay, I'm going to go get her tonight. I will get on a plane and I'll fly to Uganda and I'll bring her here. But I have to explain to this child, maybe someday, maybe if you wait another 5 years and you're a citizen, you could apply to sponsor her.
Yeah.
Or maybe her resettlement will go through, but the numbers of refugees resettled is so low. So the odds of that happening are so low, even though I wish I could just write a letter and say, no, her kids are here.
They're
and
good
they haven't
kids.
seen
We want
her.
you to come, yeah.
They haven't seen her. And that's so hard. It's so hard to kind of what you were saying at the beginning about all these systems and having to explain them, and they're so complicated, and it seems like it should be very simple, but trying to explain to youth what their options are for that, and how long it would take, and how much money it would cost, and how much persistence and paperwork and things like that to just be with their families again. It's really hard. Yeah,
it's kind of crazy to think about. And if I could really avoid talking about the politics of it all, I would, because I don't like it. I really get riled up when it comes to politics because it just annoys me.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it is one of those things where if you don't talk about it, then you can never address it, sort of thing. So I think it's worth at least mentioning some parts of how this is all tied into politics. And just to provide some more perspective of like, well, you say that they were separated from their family with war. How does that work? Like, literally, we've heard stories of people in Somalia living in a village where these other people were coming through and causing war and literally just killing people. So mom said, get your little brother and sister and start walking.
Mm-hmm.
And they literally walked across the border to Kenya, and they had to live there until they were granted refugee status.
Mm-hmm.
So like these are the realities of these people's lives. And I think if others heard and understood that reality, we would all become a little bit more softer towards their stories.
Yeah, for sure. And I think circling back to one of your questions about kind of where I started, and if I'm glad I started there, I think about really knowing what the challenges specifically for teenage refugees are, period, and being in it and seeing it. And that what consumed me was, oh my gosh, all these challenges that they're facing, and how do I help them, and how do I do these things? And then transitioning to refugee foster care and saying, okay, and it's not a comparison, it's not a competition, but just imagining, and if we all take a second and say, okay, yeah, if you can imagine how hard it is to be a refugee, period, and then to do that during your developmental age, period, and then to do that living with strangers. It's just crazy. It's so crazy. And so I think that I'm really grateful for those experiences and seeing, and sometimes just that perspective of, okay, this would still be a problem no matter where they lived, even if they putting that into perspective, but also realizing the unique challenges and circling back to just the impact of family. And I think too, our kids feel so much pressure to learn English, and they'll say, I don't want to live if there's another foster youth in the home that speaks my language, because then I won't learn English. I'm like, no, most refugees live with their families, and you have to hear English all day, but then you get to go home and speak your language and eat your food. Like, it's okay, you'll learn English. So just those kinds of experiences of knowing what it's like for, not knowing, but having a little bit of an understanding of what it's like for refugee teenagers, and then kind of what it's like for unaccompanied refugee teenagers. It's been really interesting.
I really like that you shared that perspective, because I often get called and asked for advice about, like, we have this refugee youth in our school that is having this behavior issue. Can you help us? And they're like trying to pair it to like being a refugee. And sometimes I literally say like, oh, sounds like he's a teenager.
Yes.
Like, these are just kids too, and they have the same teenage behavior problems as any other kid that's their age. And I think it's part of maybe human nature, but part of kind of the world we live in, where we're always trying to connect certain, especially bad behaviors, to other factors that they really don't relate. So just because this kid had an outburst and maybe got a fine in school doesn't necessarily, probably is not at all connected to him being a refugee. If there's any connection, maybe he has some trauma and he's trying to deal with the trauma and trying to deal with his emotions properly, but it's most likely just a teenage kid.
Yes, that's so true. I'm so glad you brought that up. And a couple of years ago, before we bought a house, we lived with my cousins, and it was hilarious because I was living with my aunt and uncle and teenage cousins, and exactly like you said, I'm thinking, this is what I do all day. And these are the same conversations, and these are the same issues, and these are the same challenges. And, talking to my aunt about the different strategies she's trying to use to support them and to help them figure it out, because being a teenager is so crazy. But that's so true. And I think we talked about this, I feel like, when I worked at Sunnyvale, that was always so clear as people would say people want to come and volunteer, and they want to they want to connect with the refugees. It's like, these kids want to talk about Justin Bieber. Yeah. Like, they are teenagers, and they don't want to talk about that. And I think that's one of my favorite parts too, just working with teenagers and just seeing that, and they want to tell me about their crushes, and they want to talk about the drama and all the normal teenage stuff.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of taking a group of teenagers who also happen to be refugee teenagers on a hike to Ensign Peak, and when we drove there, we were listening to the radio, and they knew every word of the latest Ed Sheeran song, and there was several like oh, you have a crush on who sort of comments, and then like just going back and forth, and it was a good reminder for me again to just remember, like, man, these are just teenage kids doing the normal high school, junior high stuff. We need to just support that, really, probably, not support any sort of like thoughts of like, okay, they're refugees. What does this mean? You know, like we get really deep and try to be insightful when I think we just probably need to simplify and just like, oh, these are just teenage kids. They happen to have a different background.
Yeah, exactly.
What else are you noticing in foster care though? It's probably very complicated to get people that are interested to become foster parents, foster families. What are you noticing?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually I'm going to circle back to the comment about the book I read, because I think a lot of people hear about it and, like we said, they connect with that core humanity in themselves and like, of course, I want to do this. But they don't maybe assess the skill set that it takes. Parenting your own teenagers can be very difficult, but then I've noticed some parents, and I would say particularly in Utah, would say, I have 6 kids and they're angels. And I meet them and those kids are angels. Like they're like, yes, mother. Like very obedient, right? Like they love that word, obedient. These kids are very obedient. And I just think, oh, this will be interesting. But I think there are other families who say, yeah, some of my kids listen to me, some of them don't. Sometimes this strategy works, so the other kid it doesn't work. And I think it's a very strange thing to have strangers, meaning us, in your home, observing you in your business, invading your privacy, measuring kids' rooms, just stuff like that, where it's a very invasive and vulnerable position to be in. And I really appreciate and admire the families for being willing to do that. But it also takes a level of openness to collaboration, because we don't want to tell people how to parent, but we also see that it's not working. And so we're trying to say, well, let's try something else. And people get really defensive about, no, this is how I parent and it worked. So look, yeah, it worked for those kids, but it's not working for the other kids. So I think that's really interesting. And I think for all of us in different ways, being open to adapting and changing, and when you have new information, doing something new is uncomfortable, but also I think so important for growth. And I think something I always say is refugee foster care should never work. It's crazy that we do it, but it does work, especially if families are willing to adapt, because the youth have to adapt. They have to. They're forced. They're forced to be in this new environment. They're forced to learn a new language, to be exposed to new education system, to a new style of parenting. They don't really have a say in that, which is really hard. But the family sometimes, well, they do have a choice. They don't have to change their family environment. They don't have to change the food that they eat. They don't have to change the way that they communicate or language, those kinds of things. But if they're willing to say, okay, we're both going to change and we're both going to try different things and we're both going to learn together, it's really amazing what can happen in those environments. But I recognize how difficult that is. So that's a challenge. And I think something too, there, especially a couple years ago when there was a lot of talks in General Conference about refugees, and people would feel
Mormon General Conference.
Yes, sorry. Yes.
Sorry, just jump in it.
No,
some people like, General Conference, what is she talking about?
Yeah, thank you.
Other people are like, oh yeah, I remember that talk.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And I think it's good. Like, I think what we're saying, right, is to remind people of Christianity and neighbors and caring about each other. And it was good to see people care and to be impacted by that and to want to get involved. All those things are good. But I think it's also hard to say, to realize that, and I always say when people say, oh, I heard about refugee foster care, I want to get involved. And I say, okay, well, the highest level of involvement and commitment would be to be a foster parent. And you should learn about that, and if you're open to it. But it's not something you should try out. Trying it out does more harm than good, which isn't fair, because people should be able to try something out, and they can and they do. But it's a really high level of commitment. It's long term. It's not a service project. It's not. It's it'll change everything about your life. And so that was hard because I think people are used to maybe being inspired and doing something about it, which is cool, but then being inspired by something else and doing something about it. And I think it's hard too when people feel spiritually motivated to do something and then they feel a lot of guilt and shame if they can't do it. And that was really hard to navigate with people of like, it's okay.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that what you felt wasn't real or trying to minimize that, but maybe this isn't for you.
Yeah.
So.
And I don't want to sound short-sighted or to minimize kind of what you're describing, but it almost seems not too dissimilar to like the decision to actually have your own child.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Because some people like feel this sudden burst of inspiration to have a child. And, you know, if you're in a relationship, then you can go ahead and do whatever you need to do to have a child, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, you know, we felt really good. We just went for it sort of thing. But then there's others that are really good at like, okay, we want to have children. What does that mean? How are we going to plan and be able to support the child? And what is our parenting style going to be? And just go through this whole thought process. So it kind of sounds like that you're hoping that there's like this passion behind wanting to be a foster parent, but also some thought and concern and some preparation that like, okay, are we ready for this? And are we going to commit? And once we can admit, we're going to go for it.
Yes. And exactly. And I think another thing that is true about foster care, it just is, and it's real, but it's heartbreaking, is that a lot of people don't, like you said, maybe don't put a ton of thought or planning into having a biological child, and then they do, and they're like, this is so hard. What have we done? But it's very rare. It does happen where they say, I can't do this.
Yeah.
And they have to figure it out. And they have to work it out, and you don't give up, and you keep trying, usually.
Yeah.
In foster care, that's really hard because there's an out. And there has to be an out, and I understand that, but that's really difficult because, and that's what I try, and I recognize I'm not a foster parent, and so it's not that fair for me to make judgments about what that's like. But from the outside, it seems obvious. We've had foster parents say, you know, we can't do this anymore. We told her no phone at the dinner table, and she keeps doing it. And we told her blah, blah, and I say, okay. And like you said, normal teenage behavior. I said, and I'm trying not to shame them, but everything inside of me wants to say, so if your own child, because they have their own teenage children, uses their phone at the dinner table, you're going to tell them to move out. They have 10 days to move out. Really?
Yeah.
And I know that's not the issue, right? We do this all the time.
Right.
There's something else. There's something deeper. They're not saying we can't do this anymore because of the phone at the dinner table, but that is so hard. And so I think we try to prevent that from happening, from just like making sure that they really understand what it takes, that their reason for doing it is going to last, and that they will hopefully, and foster parents have brought up, which is valid, we ask them to treat the child like their own child, and to commit to them like their own child, but then it's not, because we can pull them, we can move them. It's not like their own child because there's these strangers involved and all those other things. So I get that. I acknowledge that. So it's a strange thing if we're asking this from them, but we also don't treat them like that. And we'll say, no, you have to do this, or things like that. It's a very messy, but I would say beautiful kind of thing that families are willing to do. So.
And it's sort of illustrative of how us as humans go about relationships in general, right? Like, if there's this weird little thing that we can use as an excuse to move out of the relationship, or like to deflect what's really going on, we usually take that. We're usually like, okay, I really don't like how you squeeze your toothpaste, sort of thing. You know, like, I mean, maybe, but no, like, there's probably something deeper going on that you're not willing to talk about or consider, and you don't want to admit that maybe, like, okay, Erica, what I really want to say is that I'm just really not cut out to be a foster parent, and it's not for me, and I'm not willing to continue to sacrifice to do it. I think, I don't know, maybe somebody has said that to you, but it's probably more likely the other thing where there's some excuse that we need to.
It's not me, it's you.
Yeah. What are some of the other factors of why people get involved and want to be foster parents, and maybe you can add in some of the things that you've seen that are successful.
Yeah. I think there are lots of reasons that people get involved. I'm trying to think of different ones than what we've already touched on with like the mom saying, you know, I'd want someone to do the same for me. Then that people have kind of religious, feel moral obligation. And some people, it is political, where they're upset about political response to things, and they want to do something about it. A lot of times it's emotional. They see kids at the border and in cages and things like that.
Yeah, I was going to say kids in cages.
Yes, kids in cages.
Yeah.
And we don't live in Texas, and it's a little different process, but this is the closest thing to getting involved in that in Utah is working with unaccompanied minors. So there's some of that. Some families have been through trauma and loss themselves and really identify with that. That's been really interesting, actually. I mentioned Hotel Rwanda before, but actually we have several foster parents whose parents died during the genocide in Rwanda, and they grew up kind of on their own and had maybe informal caregivers, and they really identify with those youth and want to be involved. And so that's been really amazing. Obviously, we love to have foster parents with refugee and immigrant backgrounds, and their motivation for getting involved is, we know what that's like, or we know how hard it is with your parents, and we can't imagine what it would be like without your parents. We want to help them. So yeah, there's lots of different reasons to get involved, but I think just like anything else, trying to be aware of maybe what we were saying before about the social or other benefit of being a foster parent. Have you seen Instant Family?
No, I haven't.
It's so good. That's my plug for Instant Family. It's so good. It's about foster care. It's a comedy, which is how I tricked my in-laws into watching it, because it's a comedy, but it's also really emotional. It's with Mark Wahlberg. It came out a couple years ago.
Okay.
But they do such a good job, I think, of showing the really hard, real side and the really beautiful, warm side. But there's a scene where the parents are in their room and they're like, we hate them. And they're so ungrateful and they're so mean, but everyone thinks we're so amazing for doing it. But how could, maybe if, anyways, they're trying to plot of how they could get out of it without looking bad. And I love that scene because it was so good for me, and I think healing for me to watch, because you love these parents and you know they're good people and you've had all these endearing experiences with them. If you just saw that out of context, you'd say those are the worst people. But you see everything they're going through and you're like, that's totally valid. And so connecting with that. So that was interesting. But I don't even, if that's your reason for fostering, is it looks really good. Popular phrase is kind of the white savior complex.
Okay.
Those kinds of things. Those don't seem to last. But if there's something that draws you, you're passionate about this, you really care about this, you are able to put yourself in other people's shoes and imagine what that's like for them. And it's, I think in general with families, building a family, trying to be what the child needs instead of having the child be what you need. And that's really hard. Yeah. We all do that in our own relationships, is we try to fill voids in us. That's not really fair to a child. And I think that happens a lot, actually. Maybe something they're not getting from their own children that they hope to get from this child.
Interesting.
Different reasons to get involved. But I think when the motives are sincere and they're willing to work at it, because it's a lot of work, then it works.
Going back to the white savior complex, and I just wanted to bring this back because I think maybe it might have been the first or maybe second time that it's come up on the podcast and talking about this. And I think it might be helpful to define that, because I think from our background, it's obvious what that is because we come up against it a lot. But from others, they might be like, well, I've never heard of that. I don't know what you mean. Yeah. So I'll give it my best go to describe it, and then you can add. Sure. So my perspective is that, especially in Utah, Mormonism, literally we have a worshiping of Jesus as a white savior, and he's a white savior that came to people that were of color and save them. And it's this spiritual save from sin sort of thing, but it's literally like coming to help you, like, oh, you're a poor person from a colored ethnic background, I'm gonna help you, sort of thing. And we use that phrase in social work to kind of help people understand where maybe their motivations for coming from are. Like, we don't obviously screen and say, like, wait, are you coming at this from a white savior perspective? But we kind of like talk about it in different words and try to help people understand what is your motivation for trying to come in and help, and what are you trying to get out of this sort of thing, and maybe shift some perspective on that. How did I do?
You did great. And I think, too, to add on that, I'll share my own white savior journey, because, I mentioned seeing these films and being impacted as a little kid and wanting to do something. And I always laugh that when I started studying anthropology, I thought, I'm going to learn about these different people and places so I can help them. I thought, and then I very quickly, the essence of anthropology is how that's a very Western idea, that they need my help, and I realized that, just how it was pretty comical to study anthropology with that intention, and quickly learned, who am I to help anybody? And I gain way more than I give, but I also think maybe that was the beginning, was shifting the total opposite, and then realizing, no, what it's about is leveling the playing field and realizing, like, we all have things to give and to learn from each other. We're all connected, things like that. But I also think, building off of that, my first boss at Promise was very passionate about this, and explained it in a way that really helped me, and that I've thought back on, where she talked about the word charity, which I think, growing up in a religious organization where charity is talked about a lot, and it's the best. Charity is the best. But I'm not talking about the pure love of Christ charity. I'm talking about charity, like giving to charity, doing charity work. And she talked about how charity reinforces power dynamics, where I'm the giver and you're the receiver. I'm the helper and you're who needs help. And once I kind of had that in that kind of language, I could understand the difference. And I really tried. I'm sure I messed it up a lot, and I'm sure I mess it up still, to not approach any of the work I do as that welcome to America, I'm here to help you, I'll be your guide. Especially because I have never been through anything even remotely like anything that they've been through. Who am I to it's strange even to be a case manager. What does that mean? I'm managing your case. And I really try to acknowledge that in with the youth that I work with, because a lot of them culturally, because I'm technically older than them, might have this idea about power and authority and respect. And I say, okay, technically I'm slightly older than you, but you have way more life experience than I do, and I have no idea what that's like. What I do know is that you survived something a lot of other people couldn't, and you can do that. You can apply those skills here. I'm just going to help you understand a little bit about this system and how the rules are different so you can thrive. But kind of like you said before about, you don't need me, you did this without me, and this is a new challenge, and I'll try to help. Yeah. But you can do this. And so I don't know. I think that's my own experience with white savior, and kind of shifting my own perspective and making sure that I don't treat people like that.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think a lot of people have probably started careers, or like going back to always started jobs, started volunteering from those perspectives, and then have been able to shift. So I think explaining how you shifted could be helpful to other people. And I think you did say it pretty nicely when you kind of explain, like, oh, I can explain to you how this system works and maybe give you some education on this particular thing. But beyond that, you're already a very capable human being, then you can do all this that you need to do. And it's a great way to view kind of this type of work is, okay, maybe there's just a knowledge gap on a certain system or a certain way of doing things because of culture, custom, politics, whatever it is, and we can fill in that knowledge gap for you so you can become informed, and now you get to decide how to go out into the community yourself and live. So I really appreciate that, and I appreciate the insight from Promise South Salt Lake about
shout out to
that.
Rachel if you're out there. And Rachel too, she would say the youth often called her teacher. And I think part of it was cultural and maybe English, not having to remember people's names, but she'd say, I'm not a teacher. And they'd say, no, teacher. And she'd say, put me in the forest in Burma and we'll see who's the teacher. And I love doing that too with the youth I work with, because they part of the culture shock kind of wave is to start feeling defeated and like, maybe I can't do this. English is really hard. Going to school makes me feel stupid. Those kinds of normal experiences. But then just saying, I want you to imagine me in your hometown. And they start laughing at me. And it's funny. And saying, and I'm trying to learn Tigrinya, and I'm trying to help with the cows. And how long do you think it would take me to learn Tigrinya? And they're just laughing, and they know I would look like a complete idiot if I lived there.
Yeah.
And that's true. And so then that kind of opens them up of, you're not stupid. You're incredibly smart. You can do this. This takes time. It's okay. It's okay to ask for help. You're in a new place. But like you said, that's it.
Yeah. It is a kind of like your mind is blown when you really sit down and try to think about some of this, but on the other side, let's just simplify it a little bit. Like this is what it is. And I thought just maybe another thought about this white savior complex. Obviously, me and you are both white, and we're explaining the white savior complex from our perspective as a white person, maybe having started some of what we do from this white savior complex, or having that a part of our history, and then being able to shift our perspective. So I think I say that from a vein of like, I hope us explaining what our experience has been can maybe help somebody else get some perspective about their want to maybe become a foster parent, or their want to help with refugees here in Utah.
Yeah, and I think it's all my perspective on it has shifted, but that doesn't mean that it's not a part of who I am or how I'm perceived. And I'm definitely aware of the fact that I manage a program full of staff that represent more the youth that we work with, and these youth, and how it feels sometimes for some of the youth to say, you don't know anything about what it's like to be me. I say, I know. So I think I have become more aware of it, but it doesn't mean that I have none of that in me, or that's not part of my what my career means. It's something I think about and wrestle with and try to continue to be aware of.
And I think that's really all we all need to do surrounding these topics, is to have a little bit of a wrestle. Like, let's take some time to think constructively about it, to be sensitive about it, and make it a continual thing. Because I still go back and forth on doing a good job of speaking to some of these things and doing a bad job, and like outwardly looking like an ass, for a lack of a better word, like I go back and forth of being good and bad at these sort of things. So I think it's more about approach and sensitivity to it, and being willing to work on it over time, for sure. Yeah. So going back to talking a little bit more about foster care and what goes into that, you were mentioning some of like things of like you as a organization helping to facilitate the process of somebody becoming a foster parent, of like literally the logistics. I got to measure this room to make sure it's standard. I got to come look at your house to make sure it fits the bill. And just to give a little bit of background, you could probably speak to this better, but this is kind of what the state and the federal government does as a foster care program to make sure that we as an organization, I shouldn't say we, but you guys as an organization find places that are suitable for kids to live, sort of thing. So there's this logistical piece of like, we want to just check in and make sure that the logistics of the situation are good. But then there's also this whole other emotional connection being a parent piece.
Yeah, absolutely. And the rules and the requirements dictated by the government, like you said, were initially designed for state foster care, but then they're adapted and projected onto us, and so that's hard. And it's so hard to be the middleman with that when the parents say this is so stupid or this doesn't apply to us, and they say I know, but we can't do it without this license, and this is how we stay in compliance with this license. And then there's all the really ridiculous. We always say it's more paperwork than a mortgage. So much paperwork, so many rules, and then there's also just we do a foster parent training that kind of touches more on the soft skills of but like you said, it's the same that I use in my personal relationships, my family relationships, parenting your own children, really any kind of healthy relationships of active listening and developing relationships and understanding stages of relationships and stages of grief and stages of attachment and all these different things that go into our interactions. And then there's this ongoing trying to provide and it's kind of interesting for the staff on my team because they're trying to be an emotional support for the parents and a resource and collaborating with them. But then they also have to say, and here's this paper and this is your deadline and holding accountable. So it's a really interesting relationship, really interesting dynamic. It's an ongoing, there's a lot you have to do at the beginning and then you have to do renewals every year. So it's a lot of work, but that also means that the parents who do that are really willing to do the work it takes. So that also kind of, we have some parents who are really excited, but then all the paperwork and all the things, which is totally fair, turn them off to it. And then it's kind of like, it would have been really hard for you to do what it takes to do this. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, it kind of is for lack of a better phrase, it weeds people out a little bit.
Yeah, it does.
So, like, from a logistical standpoint, going back to, like, the very basics, the foster care program is there to help ensure that you're not putting a foster child in a closet for a room,
Yes.
But then on the total other end of the spectrum, it's like this idea of, like, you're about to have a child in your life that has a very complex life and a complex background, just like any human being. Are you ready for that?
Yeah, exactly. And something too, what you kind of mentioned, but I've been thinking about recently is there are all these different agencies involved kind of in what we do. It's this spider web almost, but it makes sense. And even though I spend so much of my time trying to follow up and collaborate with all these different agencies that interact with ours, I recognize that it's because we work with such a vulnerable population and we have to be held accountable. So we have all these people checking on us and holding us accountable and auditing us and having these expectations, which is really fair to make sure that we're taking care of these kids and we're doing our jobs. So I try to remind our staff of that, especially during audit season when it's so horrible and it's so much work. But that's the purpose of it all. Yeah.
Do people get involved purely for the economics of it?
So I'm convinced that that's a myth. It's kind of like social work, I guess, where I'm like, well, then you're not very smart because it's not a lot of money and it's a lot of work. I'm sure if you had, so the maximum you could have in your home is 3. But so it's the baseline is $28 a day, and it's considered reimbursement for what it costs to provide for the basic needs of a human being. So $28 a day is 3 meals, gas to appointments, the extra electricity and the extra laundry, hygiene items, clothes, all their needs as they get older, new underwear, all those things. That's all included in that amount. And so if you put that in hourly, it's not worth your time.
Nothing.
It's not considered income to the government. It's considered reimbursement for what it takes to meet the needs of a child. I guess it is possible to pocket that and eat rice and beans and get DI vouchers. But I would, and maybe that happens, but I would say that I haven't seen that with our families. I really haven't. And I just think there are other ways to make money that are a lot less work.
Well, I bring it up partly to dispel the myth, and I think it is for the most part a myth within refugee foster care and probably in the general foster care setting as well. Just because it is like, it doesn't make any sense that somebody would be like, oh yeah, this makes sense. I'm gonna make a lot of money from doing this sort of thing.
And that's why they do have the rule. I think that's one of the reasons why they have a rule of maximum of 3. So there's not people just kind of running a boarding house of children.
Right.
But yeah, it is a very common myth. People say that all the time. And actually, it's, speaking of just teenagers, they hear that and then they'll say that and say, you're just in this for the money. I know CCS is paying you to do whatever I want. I'm like, no, that's not how it works. CCS is paying you, so you have to drive me to my friend's house every day.
Quickly becomes a manipulative bargaining chip.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's always funny, but yeah.
Any other common myths about foster care that are out there that we could dispel tonight?
Well, I think kind of what you said about just normal teenagers. I think a lot of people, but I think it goes both ways. I think foster parents are portrayed as cruel, mean, I don't know, in movies or TV or something. And I'm sure abuse happens, and that's why they have all these checks and balances. But like I said, our foster parents are so amazing, and that's not. Our foster parents are really engaged. They work really hard. They're not the guy watching TV with all the foster kids running around kind of that you see. And then I also think for the kids, I've sat in on some state foster care youth panels, and I think it rings true for the youth in our program too, about them saying, before I was placed, my foster parents were told that I was a delinquent, that all these negative words and putting them in labels. And I think parents think foster kids means, and we both have experienced the transition from the troubling youth conference to the promising youth conference. So I think, this like troubled, dark, angry, people are scared about foster kids abusing their own children. And I usually say that can happen just like your own child could. But it's not more common. It's not a lot of the fears, I guess, that people have about a foster child. That word is loaded, and It's not fair. And I think they're just regular teenagers, and that means that I always think it's so funny just trying to prepare foster parents, because I'm like, yeah, it means some of them are really respectful and some of them are really disrespectful. Some of them are really grateful. Some of them will never say thank you, just like teenagers do. So they all have such different personalities, and people even within the same network. I thought it was funny when one of our umbrella agencies, I guess, that we work with wanted to do a call and said, you've worked with a lot of Rohingya unaccompanied refugee minors. I wanted to talk to you about that. I said, okay. And then all their questions, I'm just laughing and saying, what do you want me to say? What have you noticed about Rohingya youth? Like, well, one is like this, and one is like this, and one is like this. And
they're youth.
Yeah, they're generally like fish and spicy food. Like, that's the thing I can think of. But yeah, it's just funny. And so all the labels, I think those are the myths, is all the labels and all the preconceived notions that we have just aren't true, because like you said, they're very dynamic, complicated individuals, just like we all are. So
yeah, I think it could connect back to that comment I made about people asking about refugee youth specifically. Can you tell me about refugee youth? Versus like, can you tell me about foster youth that are in foster care? And I think, again, like as human beings, maybe it's a little bit easier to navigate our world with labels and things like that. But on the other hand, if I even think back to my childhood, and if you'd hear about the kid that was in foster care that was in your school, and you would be able to excuse like, oh, makes sense. He's a foster kid, or he's in foster care. She's in foster care, sort of thing. It makes sense why they are the way they are, and there might be some truth to that statement, that there might be some connection on behavior or their personality based upon their foster care experience. but it's more likely that they're just a kid and they need love and support.
Yeah.
And we need to do a better job as a community to remove all these labels that go with it.
For sure. Absolutely. And I think too, I really respect people who work with state foster care and those foster parents. I think the challenges that they face are really unique, and the outcomes of those programs are hard. And I think people have those stereotypes of foster youths are more likely to experience homelessness and incarceration and those things, and that's really a question of us and our systems and how are we failing these children, and is it a testament of them being bad kids? And I think too, that's another myth, I guess, and something that is unique about refugee foster care. And I've thought about this, about why is that? I don't know. I think it has to do with the youth, and maybe because it's smaller and a little more privatized, we can individualize services a little bit more. But really, 90, maybe more than 90% of our youth do really well. The 5 to 10% of the youth that really struggle in the program and out of the program consume, we spend so many meetings and all these things, and it's easy to think, oh my gosh, this isn't working, and to get really sad, and it's sad, and I think about those youth, but I also try to take a step back and say, but generally they're doing really well, like you said, I just think there's so many strengths, and all those labels aren't really relevant, honestly.
Yeah, and in general, probably 90% of overall youth in our community are doing pretty well.
Yeah,
There's that 5 to 10% that are really struggling too. That we have all these other systems, whether it's foster care, dare I say juvenile justice or anything like that. There's all these other systems in place to help those 5 to 10%. Those 90% really doing well. Let's keep moving. But there's 5 to 10% of youth that needs a little extra support.
Yeah, exactly.
Is there any reasons or things that you'd like to bring up of like this decision of like, okay, I want to be a foster care parent, but I'm not sure if refugee foster care or just a regular sort of state foster care program, is there some differences there?
Yes, that's a really good question. So state foster care, the goal is family reunification. And so there's a lot of back and forth, and that impacts the attachment, detach, which is really challenging for everyone involved. And kind of what I said about trying to fill your own void versus what does the youth need. That's so important for anything, but I would say especially in state foster care, because and even instant family, which I love, the happy ending is that they get adopted, and that's not the happy ending. Right. The happy ending is they go back with mom.
Right.
And so that has to be your goal. You have to be on the parent side. If you think that people whose kids are in foster care are bad people, then you shouldn't be a foster parent. Yeah. You have to be there for the kid, but the best thing you can do for the kid is be there for the parents. But I think if you're interested, there are more opportunities to foster younger children in state foster care than in refugee foster care. It's still their biggest need to find parents for teenagers, but they do have babies and young kids, and so if that's something that's really important to people, they should not consider refugee foster care, and they should try with state foster care. And then also if they're looking for more maybe temporary transitional kind of care, that it might be more for state foster care. But for refugee foster care, it's teenagers, and we kind of think of it as unofficial adoption, where even when they turn 21 and they age out of our program, I always say, I'm 30, I still call my parents, I go home for the holidays. We are looking for that really long-term relationship. And so adoption sometimes happens, but that kind of approach, we hope for all of our families. So if that's something that people are interested in, if you... I'm trying to think of how to put it as far as for refugee foster care. Obviously, there's just more of the cultural exposure, that does happen in state foster care, and that's an issue for them, especially to find families who speak Spanish or who might be a better cultural match for Latino families. But for refugee foster care, obviously, like, we have a lot of youth who are Muslim, and so learning about halal, if those kinds of things interest you and incorporating those kinds of things into your home interest you, then that's great. If that seems really hard for you, that's okay. It just means it's not a super good fit for you. So I think I would say that's another reason why people do it, actually, is people like to, especially living in Utah, kind of open up their world and incorporate some other cultures into their home. Some families really like to do that, and that's a reason to do it. So I think they have their own really unique challenges and needs. So I always say we're not trying to compete or take away from. If people feel like they have the skill set for state foster care, they should do that.
What's the youngest youth that you see in refugee foster?
12. But they came with older siblings.
Okay.
So I always say, don't wait around for a 12-year-old. I can't promise that will ever happen again. The average age is like 16, 17. But we got a 14-year-old this year, and I'm like, it's our baby. He's so tiny. It's a baby. He's so cute. So that's, to me, really young, is a 14. Yeah.
And I know that you haven't been involved super long term, but do you see that, when kids are aging out and that that family, those parents still stay involved and have a relationship, and there's more long term happening?
Yes, I would say what happens more often, which is sad and kind of circles back to us trying to focus more on teaching these skills to the youth, is the youth push it away. And for lots of different reasons. One, because that's normal during that stage, is to say, I don't need you. And how many moms say, my son in college never calls me.
Right.
That's normal. But that's hard. A lot of our youth are kind of push away and say, I don't need a family. I can take care of myself. And then later are alone. And that's really hard to convince them to call them and say, they'd probably be open to it again. They're like, no. I mean, it's been years, Yeah. So I think that's more common, is the youth pulls away and cuts off that relationship more often than the parents do. And that's hard on any parent. And that's hard to prepare them to say, we want you to be there long term, but also they might not want you to be there long term. So that does happen. But I would say if they're both, I would say if the youth is open to it, most of our families, that's what they really want, and they do such a great job of that long-term relationship. Yeah.
Going back to the Utah-specific factors, you mentioned that you've observed some families in Utah like having maybe a little bit more openness to wanting to invite some of the cultural aspects into their home. They're open-minded about that. Where does that come from?
Sometimes. And I would say some of them, maybe they didn't grow up in Utah, and they grew up in places where they had friends of different religions and different backgrounds, and then they moved to Utah and they think, my kids don't have that, and they don't really understand what that's like. Some of them, maybe they served a mission and they really liked that experience of living in a new place, and they also can empathize in some ways of how that was scary and hard, and they had to learn a new language and they didn't know anybody, and they like that idea of, especially if they served in a similar area, to say, having that language and that food in our home would be so cool. So I think those are some of the reasons why they might be more inclined to do that. It's not always the case.
Yeah, I was kind of curious about like the Mormon LDS return missionary factor of like, I want my mission to close to there.
Yes,
so
totally.
I know what's going on. This could be cool, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I'm just kind of curious because I'm laughing about it in my head because I sometimes just picture these well-meaning return missionaries. They're like, I got this. You know, like I lived abroad.
Yes.
Like, is that a thing where it's like they're a little bit too confident about that sort of connection?
It's also funny when they say, I speak Spanish. Like, oh, it was like 12 years ago. And that's pretty funny. And the kids are like, But yeah, definitely the overconfidence. And we all do this of thinking, I know what you've been through. I know what that's like. And it's like, nah, that was not the same. You knew it was temporary. You know, that was a choice that you made. You volunteered to do that. It's not the same. So yeah, there's definitely all sorts of levels of that happens.
Interesting. Yeah, very interesting. What other Utah factors make Utah a great place for a foster care program and a refugee foster care program that you've observed? The Salt Lake community, Utah in general.
Yeah, I think there's always the good and the bad. One good and bad is people are used to having a lot of kids, and having more kids isn't that big of a deal.
Okay.
Whereas in other places where it's more common to maybe have no children or one child, ask them to take, well, how about 2 more? Would be like, what? No, what?
Yeah.
Like, but I think a lot of families are like, sure, yeah, we have a huge van, load them up, and you know, they're used to that kind of lifestyle. But that also means that that's pretty hard. Something we've realized is a lot of our youth that have really high therapeutic needs shouldn't be in homes with young children for various reasons. And so finding families without young children, it's like, well, Utah has a lot of young children. And then also just the amount of time that it takes if you have 6 kids. That's a lot of work, and to have to give a child the attention that they need and all the therapy appointments and things like that, it's just really overwhelming.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good thing, and then also can be a challenge. Other Utah specific, I think being a conservative state that's known for being open to refugees is good.
Yeah, I was going to say that too.
Yeah, so that definitely impacts things. And I think when I talk to other states that do this, they're really surprised and say, how did you do that? Say, I don't know. Yeah. Another funny thing that, just as I say that, someone said, sometimes we have teenagers who are pregnant or have young children, and other states have said, how did you get foster parents who are willing to do that? I said, they all seem to be willing to do that. Right. It doesn't seem to be, people are excited about that.
Yeah.
Like to have a baby in the house or whatever.
Yeah.
Or to help like a young mom figure
Right.
that out. And I don't know why that is. Maybe it is a Mormon factor or something with babies, or I don't know. But that has not been hard.
Yeah.
To find families who are willing to do that. And I think generally, I don't know. I think some other challenges is we're really always trying, we want foster parents anywhere. I'm not trying to discriminate, but living in Salt Lake is better because the schools know how to work with our youth.
Yeah, for sure.
There are systems in place, the interpreters, the specific mental health services at AAU, UHHR are in Salt Lake. It's really difficult because refugee families, as of right now, are almost entirely resettled to Salt Lake, but we resettle kids in places where they're the only ones.
Right.
And that's really hard, and it's hard for the families to understand why that's hard.
Right.
And I get it, and they get defensive, and they're like, this is a great place to live. I'm like,
right.
Yes, for you and for your
right.
children, but what is it like for our kid to live in Eagle Mountain? So that's a challenge, and I think that's something that's a little unique to Utah. Is I've talked to other states that do this, and there are multiple kind of cities or cultural hubs, but in Utah, for now, it really is just Salt Lake.
Yeah. So
we started getting calls this summer from people kind of in St. George and Cedar City and saying, why won't you place here? And I'm thinking, what? I'm not going to place a kid in Cedar City by themselves with
right.
no refugee community at all, no
right.
interpretation, no ESL, all these things. And that's hard to explain. And I think that's kind of unique about Utah is really, if you want any kind of culturally relevant anything, it's in Salt Lake.
Yeah. That's an excellent point. I don't know that I've thought about it that way, but it completely makes sense. Mm-hmm. As we wrap up, do you have any other final thoughts or nuggets of wisdom or asks from the community that you...
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of mentioned this, that being a foster parent's a really intense level of commitment. We're always looking for more parents, especially if you've parented teens with depression, anxiety, other mental illnesses that you feel like have taught you things about mental health, about therapy, about needs that teenagers might have while experiencing those things. That really helps. But also there are other ways to get involved. So if you don't feel comfortable being a foster parent, don't push yourself into that or convince yourself to do that. You can volunteer, you can mentor, you can tutor. We're trying to build more programs to support the foster parents. So kind of common, you're familiar with, resettlement agencies have mentoring programs for new refugee families where family can be matched with them and they can help them and be like a neighborly support system.
Yeah.
And we're trying to do that for foster families, which foster families are first a little hesitant for. I don't need that,
Yeah.
I'm not new here, but it's a new experience and it requires a lot. And if we can do more of a village approach and support the families with all that entails, that will preserve placements and give them the support that they need to do this long term, which is what's in the best interest of the kids. So there are lots of ways to get involved, and even just spreading the word, because maybe it's not a good phase in your life or whatever, but maybe your cousin or your neighbor or something, it is.
Right.
So I think the biggest thing is most people don't know what it is and they've never heard of it, or they've heard of it but they think it's something it's not.
Yeah.
So I think learning about it and sharing it with people, so that people who feel like it's a good fit for their family find us. So
yeah, and I think maybe this is a shameless plug for the podcast, but also like, hey, just listening to this episode, I think you do a wonderful job of explaining some of those intricacies and the details of what might go into it. So it could be just a good listen to like, okay, I now have a little bit better idea of what it means to be in foster care. Yeah,
for sure. And I think realizing this is something unique about that we're the only program in Utah. Not every state does it. And the United States is only one of, I think, 3 countries in the world that resettles unaccompanied minors. And so learning about that, it's cool that we do it. It's really fascinating how they were able to connect a system that's already in place and adapt it for this population. And so listening to podcasts and researching and learning about it, and it's good. Yeah,
if people wanted to reach out and get in contact with you just in general or specifically about foster care.
Yeah, so I work for Catholic Community Services, so ccsutah.org has a lot of information. People want to reach out to me. I mean, I pretty much give out my cell phone's on the website. You can call me. Okay. My phone number is 949-973-5558. So yeah.
There we go. And we can put that contact info in the little notes attached to the episode as well. So if people want to check that out. We started off by kind of slagging off people on their Christian conservative beliefs, but I think we came full circle and we admitted that Utah actually does a pretty good job considering it being a politically conservative red state. And so Utah might be a model for that. But, in general, there's some still room to work on that perspective, I think. But I really appreciate your time, Erica. It's been great talking and really added to my perspective. I feel like I knew a decent amount, but it's really helped me to add some perspective too.
Thank you so much. You're very easy to talk to.
Oh, thanks. Thanks everybody for listening.